I'm Peter Anthony. I'm the director of the OpenStage production of The Crucible. I'm also the designer, so you see behind the set I designed for the show. I'm also the sound designer as well. Well, I'm always looking for plays that are relevant. And this play certainly was written during the 1950s, during the Joe McCarthy communist witch hunt. So Arthur Miller it was an analog, obviously. It's a play about the Salem witch trials, which took place in 1692, where 19 people were hung, accused of witchcraft, and were unwilling to confess to it, and so they were hung. So it's a tale of, certainly, on the basic level, it's a tale of moral courage, moral crisis, and moral courage. But Arthur Miller saw this as an analog to what he was experiencing in the 1950s, and even now I think it's even more relevant, because we are still having witch hunts of one way or another, different context. Certainly fear-mongering that is going on in our society, certainly the real and imaginary threats from the outside, from certainly terrorism to the fear of the changing demographics of America, the fear of the other, people that don't look like us, the demonizing of this otherness, and then certainly the crying out that's going on, the Me Too situation that's going on also has some analog to the Crucible and the actions in the Crucible as dramatized by Arthur Miller. So the relevance is always, and plus on a basic level, it's just storytelling. It's a wonderful story. It's a classic. It's amazingly constructed play in which tension and action and rising action keep building until the final climax. When I talked with the costume designer, we talked about how we wanted to not distance Salem, 1692. We wanted to bring it a little bit more into we want to say, in production meetings we talked about an alternate reality, an alternate universe, so that we had a little bit more play in terms of how the costume design was being created, so that we were not slave to just a historical authenticity. We could play with it a little bit, and in that sense, kind of blurring the historical specificity and then bringing that a little bit to the forefront, so the audience would not be able to just distance and say these are just superstitious people in 1692 and have nothing to do with us. We wanted to bring that contemporary relevance to the audience, and that's part of the blurring that we did in terms of the costume design, and certainly the set itself is more of a metaphoric representation of the thematic dynamic that is going on in the play. Challenges are always, every play has unique challenges. This is a large cast show, so we have 19 actors performing, and we have certain scenes that we have 16 actors on stage, and so that is always a challenge, technically a challenge in a limited stage. The Magnolia Theatre is not a large stage space. We make as much use of it and as good use of it, certainly, but that's always a challenge, not only in terms of the physical action that is needed, that is required of a scene, but also how do you draw the focus of the audience to where you want the eye to land in a scene. And so that working that is almost a choreography. It's almost dance-like in many ways, not that it's non-realistic movement, but in terms of the specificity and how each action from one character to the next dovetails into each other in a way that you create something that is visually stunning, visually has a focus, and that you lead the audience's eye to where you want them to watch. And so that's one. It's a text that is that is you're always dealing with scene transitions, and you want to make those as smooth as possible. You don't want to. I use transitions. What I mean, moving from one scene to the next. It's very important that that movement from one scene to the next is smooth. It is you use a blackout. In other words, where the stage goes dark for dramatic purposes, not for practical purposes. If you have a scene change where furniture needs to move, which we do have, there's something else going on. The eye, the focus, we bring the lights into a smaller area on one actor, or in one case we have a series of 3 sweepers that lead us into the next scene, in which one of the characters is sweeping. But rather than just going black and doing that, we have this notion of these 3 sweepers, and this is very choreographed. There's music going on, and it is this very very striking image of these 3 women sweeping, and of course that has a lot of other metaphors of witches and brooms, and 3 is also a mystical number. And so, and if people pick that up, that's fine. If they don't pick that up, that's fine too. But the image is very striking. And so they're watching a very striking image as the scene is being changed behind them. And so that it just smoothly moves in. So we're not in dark. I don't leave the audience in darkness. And there's other places where we use different devices, where the scene is shifting behind and we see something going on downstage in front of the scene shift, lit while the scene shift is being done in darkness. So that's also challenge. Structurally, plays always have those challenges. And it's always working and bringing to life the characters. You don't want working with the actors. I think if you cast well, those challenges are less. So that they always say 90% of directing is casting well, and so we have a marvelous cast. Wonderful group energy, ensemble. They work so well together, and that makes my job a lot easier. But it is that working with the actors and bringing to life moment by moment the action and the situation is always what dominates the rehearsal process, and so that is always challenging to communicate to the actors in a way that they will understand, and also trying on choices. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner with just a single choice too early. The early rehearsals are about exploring and trying on different choices and seeing what ultimately will work, is the best choice for this production, for these actors. So those are always challenges, but it's always it's work, but it's joyful work, particularly when you have a cast as wonderful as this cast is, and to work with. So speaking about certainly the challenges of transferring from rehearsal studio onto the stage, we have a limited amount of time. So I always make sure that the actors are ready to perform before we're in the theater. So that the challenge then is for the actors is not the acting, but it's about adapting to a new environment. And so that takes some time. It's some long hours, particularly bringing in the set, hanging the lights, focusing the lights, building the cues, light cues, sound cues. All of that is time consuming. And that's done before the actors come in. That has to happen in the case of the OpenStage Tech Week. That set and lighting and all of that prep happens in the one day. The actors are not called that day, and then the next day the actors come in. We add in costume, makeup, and of course they're getting the sense of the set for the first time. So those are always challenges. That's why it's very important that I know the performances are there, even for a moment they're occupied and their attention is to adapting to the new environment. So that is the one challenge. And I speak about the set and how I design a set. I look for certainly themes. What is the heart and soul of the play? What is the relevance of the play? What are the dynamics going on within the storytelling? So with this particular set, it was certainly you're looking at a very codified world, a very structured world, in many ways of necessity because they were survivalists. This is 1690s, in Massachusetts, and there was a frontier. They were survivalists. They were harsh winters. So the society was very structured, and consequently there was a suppression. Certainly there was certainly a religious component to their society. It was a theocracy. And so there was a belief system that permeated the society, and it was a patriarchal society. So some of the dynamics that were going on is you're dealing with this highly structured society, yet you have these young women, these young girls who are wanting, are very much about young lovers and sweethearts, and of course the central conflict is Abigail, a young woman who is obsessed with an older married man, and it becomes destructive. Certainly, her obsession becomes destructive. But that you have something that is very natural in the human species, this sense of awakening sexuality, and this suppression of the women and the young women. They were basically treated a little better than slaves, and so they go out in the woods and they try to conjure their lovers. So you have this sense of this contrast between structured society and this wilderness. And so that was what was my informing notion about the set. So you see that it's surrounded. I knew I wanted representation of the woods, and that's very difficult to pull off in an artificial way in theater. So I offered some trees, some small trees that were going to be cleared anyway, out of my yard, and so we cut them down, and that was one of the challenges scenically is how to actually mount them in a way that we wouldn't be destroyed, that we could bring into the theater in a way that they would be intact. And our building, my master carpenter did a wonderful job of mounting them and putting them together. So you have the trees in the perimeter, and then you have above these beams representing kind of the architecture of Salem, but also in an abstract way this structured codified society in which the beams are hanging. They are almost like blown apart. There's a dynamic sense about these beams that they're not grounded in a way, and that's what is happening in the society. What is ripping apart the society is this notion of a energy that is coming from the feminine, that is a suppression of the feminine, that is actually erupting. And as with any group of people that is suppressed, that the natural expression is of their being, their culture, or their identity is being suppressed, that will eventually erupt in a society and unfortunately erupt in destructive ways to tear down a society, and so that there can be maybe a healing. And so that was what was informing this design. So you'd begin. I always work three-dimensionally. I build models. They're scale models. I don't do much in terms of sketching or renderings. I basically kind of work in my head and then go and start working with actual three-dimensional objects. So this whole natural bend in the beams, how they naturally kind of balance, I found that out while I was doing the model, and how it would be basically hung or flown, and which points were right to fly the piece, to create that angle of balance. Well, who should see the play is anybody who loves good drama. This is an American classic, and it hasn't been done here for a while. And so I would say, lovers of good drama should see this. Certainly relevant drama, people who are maybe familiar with the piece want to see a version of it that maybe is different from others. There's some things unique about this production that are unlike other productions. It was, there's a recent revival of this just a couple years ago on Broadway. And I think it's being revived more because of its relevance. So there's a lot of production value in this, that you surround this drama with the visual component, the sounds of it are haunting sounds. There's disembodied voices that create the atmosphere in which these characters interact with. So it's I would say full spectrum theater.